morning, everybody. I wanted to take a minute, and I've been talking to Aaron and Keith and Mary about discussing a little bit about the state of our market and the opportunity that we have come to believe we have. So let's talk about that for a minute. I just want to talk about what's going on real simply, and I'll try to make this as easily digestible as possible. Because to me, it's not as complicated as some of the things that you can see. Of course, there's a lot of moving parts and pieces, but simply, the Fed has two jobs. Their first job is to fight inflation and to try and maintain a target inflation rate, which the Fed has said that is about 2%. So they're trying to get inflation. They say that a healthy inflation rate is 2%. So their monetary policies are in line with trying to keep inflation around 2%. So we've had inflation that's run a lot hotter than that. So you've seen the Fed use their tools to combat that. And they do that through making borrowing cost more to cool down the economy, cool down demand, cool down some things that make pricing drop, right? Supply decreases, pricing will come down. That fights inflation. And so that's one tool, and that's what they've been doing. Their second job is to maintain stability within our financial system. And so you may have read certain articles over the last week or 10 days that say that the Fed will keep raising rates until something breaks, and then they'll have to pivot their strategy. Well, something broke. And specifically, we had some smaller regional banks that ended up having a lot of their depositors ask for their deposits, and they didn't have them. And that's the big reason why some of these banks are failing or are struggling right now. And the reality is that this is as simply, and I don't want to oversimplify this, and some of you that are smarter than me can weigh in if I go astray or say something that isn't true. But from what I've understood and studied and read, basically these banks have failed, especially the Silicon Valley Bank was they took short-term deposits, right? And so the best way I can do this is an example. If you give me $100, you give me $100 and you have a term that says, I can get that $100 back anytime I want. You're going to give me the $100, but you can take it back at any time. That's a deposit. You've deposited $100 to me, but you can take it back at any time. If I take that $100 then and invest it in something that gives me a return 10 years from now, I've put myself at risk, right? Because if tomorrow you want your $100 back, I just put it in a vehicle that I can't get my money back in until 10 years from now. So I don't have the $100 to give you. I've just failed as your bank because you want your $100 back. I don't have it. Similarly, this is what Silicon Valley Bank did, is they took deposits where depositors could take their money back at any time, invested it in long-term investments that then went down in value. Specifically, they invested them in long-term treasuries. And as the Fed raises rates, think about, if I put my money into a treasury that was paying 3% interest, and then the Fed raises the rate to 4%, what's the value of my treasury? Did my treasury go up or down in value if my treasury is paying me 3%? Went down, right? Because I can get somebody can go out into the market and get a treasury at 4%. So now mine is devalued. So it's worth less in that moment. It's worth less than what I paid for it. So if I you want your $100 back, I'm in a 10-year treasury. The only way for me to give you that $100 back is for me to sell that treasury to give it back to you, but it's not worth $100 right now because the rate went up. And so these long-term investments decreased in value, meaning they didn't have the capital to cover deposits, and a lot of companies asked for their deposits back all at the same time. They call that a bank run, and the bank didn't have the deposit to give back. Okay, so all of that I'm sure is clear as mud. You gave me $100. I went and put it in a 10-year that went down in value. I don't have $100 to give you back. I failed. That's what happened to these banks and some of these long-term banks. Why does any of that matter? Well, the Fed raising rates, fighting inflation, financial instability hits when banks start to fail because they've made some of these decisions. So now the Fed has a decision to make. They can back up the depositors, try to add stability to the financial market by making it less expensive to borrow, or at least not making it more expensive and compounding the problem. Or they can hope that this doesn't cause other banks to start failing as well, people to start running deposits in other banks that may not have the same situation and may not be over leveraged like a few of these that are making the news are. But if people's perception is their money isn't safe in a bank, then you could have a financial instability. So the Fed can't let that happen. So something is potentially breaking. So now the Fed has to slow down their fight against inflation. Make sense? So, okay, we have to make sure there's stability first before we can fight inflation. So we're going to have to slow down. So the mortgage market, and here this is where it applies to you, the mortgage market was pricing in the Fed's need to more aggressively fight inflation 10 days, 14 days ago. So you saw rates go to over 7%. Then we started having some of these bank failures, and the Fed then has to change their tune, and people are projecting that they're going to have to create stability first before they go back to fighting inflation. So their target and some of the narratives about what they're going to do in this upcoming meeting has lowered expectations of how high they'll raise the rate. Some are saying it might be 0. Some are saying it's a quarter. We don't know, but it's less than what they thought 10 days ago. And so now the market is repricing to that new expectation. So rates fell. We good? You don't need to know all of that context. I just want you to have a basic understanding of what's happening, because your sales teams are going to ask, your customers are going to ask, and I want you to have some idea of what's going on here. So the Fed will fight that instability until their return, this gets behind us a little bit, which means rates will lower. And you might have some customers that are saying, I think rates will go further down. I don't necessarily think that's the case. In fact, we had a little bit of an upward adjustment yesterday. I think, and I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not signing anything that says I know what's going to happen. I certainly don't, and none of us do. But rates are lower today, but inflation is still a problem. So here's where I think the opportunity exists for us. Because of what I just said, rates are depressed now because the Fed has to fix stability issues, not in the short term. So rates will stay probably around where they're at for a minute, but just for a minute until that stability returns. And there's still this existing inflation. Inflation was still, the CPI index came out at 6%, which was lower, good news, but still not 2%. So there's still a fight to be had against inflation. And so they're going to have to turn their attention back to that as soon as they fix the broken instability problem. So I think we're in a window here where rates have come down unexpectedly, and we should take advantage of it. It has created a more favorable buying environment for homes because rates are lower. So, and in fact, it's created a $35,000 purchase power for your customers over the last 4 days. Cool, right? Remember how we did that? Remember last week, we talked about buying down rates and the purchase power? Well, here, let me show you. All right, $400,000 home. Last week, our rates were at 7 1/8. That's ours. You may have give or take a little bit, but I'm going to use what I know were our rates here. So we put 10% down. Our payment is $24.25 on principal and interest. You remember this? Okay. Well, now our rate is 6.49%. 6.49% gives me a payment of $22.73. So my question is, what purchase power did a customer just gain by this 5/8 percentage point lower interest rate? So how we would figure that out is at the higher rate at 7 1/8, what's the purchase price that gives me the payment close to $22.73? So if I raise this back up to last week's rate, a customer would have had to buy a home for $375,000 to get the same payment. So effectively, a $25,000 purchase power was just given to your buyers within the last 4 days. They can buy a home for $25,000 more for the same payment today than they could last week. Does that make sense? I want you to know this, because as we're following up with customers, it's one thing to say that we've just gotten about $140 better payment. That's good. That matters to me. My payment's $140 less. But it's even more impactful when you say, it's the equivalent. What happened in the last 4 days is the equivalent of us lowering the purchase price $25,000. That's big deal. That's the difference between one floor plan or another, right? I mean, you could step up to 200 more square feet in an extra bedroom for $25,000. So here's the opportunity, team, that I wanted just to make sure we capture. There's some urgency in this lower rate that gives your buyer more purchase power, where they can buy something more in tune with what they need or afford truly what they want today versus last week. So go out and tell the world that they have this opportunity, and to take advantage of some of the instability that's going on. And the way they take advantage of it is to buy now when these rates have come down, not wait for the Fed to turn back their attention towards inflation. I think we can create some urgency this way. Yeah, do you agree? Okay. So we talked last week about extended rate lock programs. You should have those. You should have asked your preferred lenders for your extended rate locks, so that we can make sure that if a buyer comes in and you've got a home that closes in 90 days, 120 days, 6 months from now, you can also tell the buyer, we got you. Rates are down right now. We have the ability to lock you in now for your build that delivers 6 months from now. Don't forget that Rocket's offering a free rate lock. Right now, their rate is 6 3/4. I confirmed it this morning, 6 3/4 for a free, no points on the back end, no upfront fee to the customer, a free rate lock. They can take advantage of the rate going down below 7 now for 6 months. You and your preferred lenders may have things that are longer that might cost some points, and you can do some things with your builder partners that help the buyer feel like they did not pay for it, or they're getting made whole for any upfront points. There's ways to do that. And so you just need to talk with your builder partners about what it is and how you want to attack this blip, what I believe is a blip right now, that we should use to create urgency. Okay, there. I said it the way it makes sense to me. Somebody come on and say it differently, and say it the way that you understand it. Why is now a great time to buy a home?
I like the word buying power, Nate. I think that's very powerful, especially for a particular set of buyers. Right now, I can buy a home, save a couple $100 possibly if I stay at the price I was originally looking, or I have more buying power so I can maybe go up in a floor plan, or possibly get that want that I was compromising and about to lose.
That's it, Vicky. That's it right there. What I was going to piggyback, Nate, is we just spent 2 weeks showing our sales associates how to sell with the higher interest rate. So don't let them go out there and say, oh, well, forget what I said the past 2 weeks. Now interest rates are a thing and you need to come in. No, you want to capitalize on, say, hey, everything I told you the past 2 weeks is correct. But now with what's happened in the market, this gives us an opportunity to where you do have more power, and let's figure out how to use this new power you have. Do you want it? Remember those things we had to pull out the past couple of weeks because of interest rates that you really wanted? Now let's see how we can put those back in.
Nate,
and
how
maybe
much?
Go ahead.
I was going to ask Nate, what did you say was what's the change in dollar value over the last week or two? You mentioned a specific number, 25?
25.
Yeah,
That's a $400,000 home. Mm-hmm.
Right. So we always talk about if you're talking about buying power, you use the largest number. And if you're talking about monthly payments, you use the smallest number. So 25,000 is the number people need to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the way Tori said it in the comments. The price of your home just came down $25,000, the equivalent of $25,000. Your monthly price just came down the equivalent of a home value decrease of $25,000.
And it's for a limited time only. We don't have a crystal ball. So like now's the time to act if this is what you want to do. And also we have to remember our customers, we can't assume they know this or they're figuring this out. Like we really need to empower our sales teams to say like, it's our duty and our service as a sales professional to make sure they understand this. You never want the customer coming back to you feeling like they missed out on a great opportunity because they didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a psychological, so what I said on a call with our senior team this week was, I think that there's a different problem that was just created. I think that before we had affordability problems and real numbers problems, and now that has created, we now have a more favorable environment for purchase. It's a better buyer's market today, but now we have a psychological problem. We have a problem with buyers feeling like, well, there's some instability in the economy. Maybe I shouldn't buy. And so that's a different thing, right? By framing it for them as an opportunity, then I think you can create a desire for gain and create urgency with it. I do not believe that this causes home values to drop. And I do not believe that it makes I know it doesn't make interest rates go down back to 4%. It's gone down and priced in this new instability, but it can't last as long as inflation is at 6%. So those are the realities. So I believe very strongly that you've got a lower than right interest rate right now against those other factors because of the blip in instability in the financial institutions. Most banks are not over leveraged the way that Silicon Valley is. So there is this other psychology that if everybody decides they're going to put their money under a mattress, you could have problems, but most banks are not over leveraged in long-term investments with short-term deposits. Those that are getting cracked right now, they're having problems, but there's some security being set up on the backdrop by the Fed that says we're going to secure the depositors. So hopefully that moves us on from anybody doing any more bank runs over the next 30 days. And then I think as soon as we see evidence that this didn't transfer over to all these other private banks or smaller regional banks, the Fed gets right back to attacking inflation. I don't know when that is. Nobody does.
Nate, there's a thing to add just for context on the bank itself, because it's a very, very unique bank. It's literally the bank of the tech companies and the venture capital firms. So while your bank and my bank has lots of people like us whose deposits are probably not north of $250,000 in those banks, this bank has virtually nobody in its bank who has less than $250,000. Everybody who banks at this bank, which by the way is a virtual bank without like branches, because it's just there for this purpose, it's the Silicon Valley Bank. Everybody banking at that place is essentially a VC or a tech entrepreneur or a tech firm. So the moment one tech company found out that there may be the issue that Nate said, essentially somebody said there's a problem, and basically all of them at once, all these tech companies hold. The odds are, based on what's there today, that no one's going to Chase Bank, Bank of America, or even your local credit union with a similar problem. And the bank probably has more access to cash because the distribution of the deposits that they have is not so concentrated into one particular industry, which has also been experiencing lots of layoffs lately.
Yep. So logic prevails. And as soon as it does, the Fed gets back to fighting inflation and your mortgage rates will go back up. That's a reasonable argument that creates an opportunity for us right now. Midst of March Madness, we all just got a gift of more affordability and in a more favorable buying terms. Go take advantage of it. Mary's right. Buyers may not know this. They don't watch I watch mortgage rates more than I'd like to admit. Most buyers don't. So be the advocate for them right now and go give them a more affordable monthly price by getting them locked into something today. Cool? All right.